Hello, everyone, and welcome to Take a Knee. I'm Pastor David. We want to get to our message real quickly here today because I've got so much I want to talk about. I want to begin with talking about identity. I was talking with my good friend Randy the other day, and I want to give him a shout out today. I know he's listening. We were talking about identity and how it's interesting that we don't really know how to deal with our identity. It's one of those areas of our life that can make us really feel lost if we don't know who we are. And we really can't even begin that journey without a relationship with Christ. In fact, let me give you an example. I was reading an article the other day, and I'm going to just read one section of it here for you. It's actually on the internet, and you can find it, and you can look up this lady. Her name is Anna Delvey. And this woman later was recognized as Anna Delvey by the elites of New York, or at least that's the name I think she gave them. And I'm not sure if that was her real name or not, but she had lied about her true identity for years. The people who spent their time partying and spending money on designer clothes were absolutely convinced that this Russian German lady belonged to their high social class. However, once they knew who she really was, this was a real shock for all of them because she had done such an excellent job of convincing them that she was somebody else. Turns out she was a con artist, but she had managed to create the look of an heiress of a really wealthy family by treating herself to lots of exclusive experiences, trips, clothes, and all the like. And all the people who got to know her just accepted it. This wasn't exactly a new phenomenon in high-end circles of New York. In other words, people would come and go, and you would meet people, especially in New York City, that would come from Europe, and they would just, because they had a lot of money, they could just buy their way in. And so, but it turns out she was staying in hotels. She was spending money like it was just water slipping through her fingers. Well, it turns out where she got a lot of her money was she was borrowing it from various friends. So she must have had a chunk of money to begin with. Well, it turns out she had borrowed that. And she used that to create the whole image. And once she had kind of gotten to the point where people saw her as trustworthy, and she was making promises like, well, I can't get to my cash right now. It's because it's in Europe. It takes a little while. So, hey, if I can borrow this from you, I'll get back with you. Well, it turns out that it was her personal trainer was put in a position where Anna didn't have the money. And she said, well, hey, could you put it on your card and I'll pay you back later? And she was like, well, okay. And she did it. Well, it turns out her credit card, I'm not sure what her limit was, but apparently she got charged $60,000. And Anna, of course, at that point, kept on putting her off. And then finally, that woman, her friend, trainer, went and got a lawyer. And they began to do a deep dive on the girl. And that's when they discovered she was completely a fake. Yes, she was Russian German. Yes, her family was in Germany, but she was far from being an heiress. Her parents were just average people. And so she had put on this fake identity, and she was meeting with professional athletes and actors and actresses and high families, millionaires, in New York City, and was just living on the high life. And it turns out, of course, she was very indebted to people and to banks, and she was always on the run, keeping 2 steps ahead of people catching her. Finally, they caught her, and I don't know what the latest is, but apparently she was arrested, and it's likely she's going to do some prison time. And in her mind, she's probably thinking, well, it was worth it to live a life that I probably would never be able to live. That just tells you how desperate people are to be important, to have an identity that is more than just what they would think in their life, a mundane life. See, when Rick Warren wrote his book, The Purpose-Driven Church, it really was talking about, he really began with the whole idea of individuals that have a purpose. But you know what? You can't have a purpose without the person. You can't have a purpose until you understand where you came from and know that there is a creator God. And so, as I was talking with my good friend, we were talking about identity, and we were talking about how this identity really shifts. Well, first of all, when we're young and we spend most of our lives trying to, from our youth all the way up to our young adult stage, trying to figure out what that is. And then maybe we begin to settle into it for about a decade or two, and then it begins to diminish. And so we begin in some measure of desperation. We have a short period of time of, possibly being comfortable in our own skin, and then spend the rest of our lives beginning to watch it diminish. And that is one of the hardest parts. But I don't really want to talk about that part, so to speak, because not everyone who's listening to this is old. I mean, if you're older, then you know what I'm talking about. That your identity begins to change and transform because it literally falls off of us, or we shed it like a skin as we age. Whether our physical prowess disappears, we're not who we used to be. And so that changes. And it makes us sometimes a little desperate to try to figure out what that is. But we'll come back to that because there is an answer. There is a solution. And of course, we can find that in Scripture. So what we're really talking about is how we panic. And sometimes when we panic, we tear the whole house down. And in other words, we do awkward things. Or we can just reach for Jesus, right? And continue to understand that our identity is really wrapped up in Him. And so we ask the question, we even ask this question of Jesus, who am I? This is, of course, a question for the theologian and philosophers, but God does tell us that we are His creation, made in His image. And we could just stop right there because that's amazing in and of itself. But the answer to the question really is there. When we're made in His image, well, then we need to ask the question, well, who is God? What has God done? What are the attributes of God, His communicable and His incommunicable attributes, as they say? And as the more we discovered who God is, and the more we learn about His character and how He interacts with us, what He has done, what is His plan, His purpose in working through His Son, Jesus Christ, then we begin to discover a little more about ourselves because, like father, like son, and like son, like father. And so we share the DNA, we share the image. And so who is He, I guess, is where we really need to begin. And so the more we learn about God, the more we can learn about ourselves, at least generically. And then there is the specific part of who we are. I want to read something to you regarding DNA, because when we think about God as a creator, listen to this. I quote, "When the genetic material of your mother met the genetic material of your father at conception, their DNA joined together to create a brand new cell with a distinctly similar yet unique set of DNA. This DNA is the written instructions to build and operate your avatar." The author uses avatar for our body. Just language that most people are going to understand if you watch the movie. These DNA instructions, the ones made from mom and dad, if completely uncoiled and stretched out, would be over 2 meters in length. And it all fits inside the nucleus of each cell. So the instructions are in each one of our cells. For reference, the average size of the nucleus, the most inner portion of any cell, is about 6 micrometers. On this one strand of DNA, there are 3 billion base pairs, combination of nucleotides and molecules called adenosine, thymine, quinine, and cytosine, or sine. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. But that connect like perfect lock and key, ultra microscopic puzzle pieces. If you were to count every atom in one strand of DNA, one every second consecutively until the end, it would take you 190.8 years to complete. That's how complex we are. It's incredibly detailed. And people wonder or think that this was all random. Each nucleotide is a certain puzzle piece built with carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen atoms, and it takes approximately 114 billion atoms to create one complete strand of DNA. Each and every cell in your body contains one complete strand of DNA. That is incredible, isn't it? And when we think about how amazing and detailed and unique that we are. We're made in God's image. And so complexity certainly comes to mind. So why am I talking about all this? Is this a science lesson? Not really. What I'm really trying to talk about is how complex we are and how unique we are. So when we think about identity and we tie that into how complex we are, made in God's image, then it means that every one of us does have a very unique purpose. We have a generic purpose to be in the image of God and be like God. But how we display that, how we, through our mouth, through our eyes, through our hands, through our feet, through our voice, through everything that we do and say and think and create, is all going to be incredibly unique. In fact, I want to say this, that the moment you discover that and you're able to walk in that, see, that's why I think, well, let me finish myself. The moment you walk in that and discover that, there's going to be incredible freedom and joy and happiness. Because all of us want an identity. We want to be unique. Well, guess what? You are. So let me go back to what I was going to say. And that is, when we try to be something that we're not, or we're not finding our identity in God, then it makes absolute sense that in the end, we're going to be confused, that we're going to panic, and we're going to do awkward things to try to fulfill that. You know, when you think about the early man and how he looked up, see, we're trying to figure this whole thing out, because now I'm introducing the idea of that we can't understand who we are until we understand him. Because all of this complexity cannot be really unlocked until we approach God. See, if you just think that you're random, if you just think that you are just, not a mistake, but just a random thing that just sparked out of nowhere, then you're not going to feel that special. You're going to feel like, well, okay, maybe I was just an accident. Maybe I was just what happened. And in fact, taking God out of the world makes people feel incredibly insignificant without an identity. And remember, you can't have a purpose without the person. And so imagine early man, they tell us that they were, Neanderthal and guys with their knuckles dragging on the ground and that they weren't very smart. And, I don't believe that at all. In fact, I believe that the earliest man was incredibly wise and smart. In fact, I'm going to go on record here, and I can't prove it, but I have read other authors that say, actually, man was incredibly smarter than modern man, that our brains have shrunken, that we're not as smart as we used to be as mankind. In fact, it makes sense that the closer we were to createdness, that, in the creation, that coming Adam and Eve, they may have been simple, but they were perfect and probably geniuses. That's my thought. So let's think if the early man looked up and we know that when they looked up and they saw the sun, that they reached for the only knowledge that they had. Isn't it interesting that they assumed that some creator, that nothing was ever by accident from the beginning? And this is hardwired to every human, that mythology and the earliest of man, tribal man, and all cultures across the world would look up into the sky and assume that there was a God driving that sun across the sky with horses, or that that rain was being sprinkled by the hand of a God. Isn't that interesting? And they looked at it with absolute seriousness. And that was their thought. And they saw themselves connected to that, truly. Of course, in time, they learned, and with instruments and a society that began to grow, and we began to learn and grow and have more time of existence and tapping into this wonderful brain that we've been given, we began to discover other things. We began to say, there are forces at work here. There are things that are happening, gravity and all that is happening on the earth, the systems that we have in place, the laws of gravity and thermodynamics and all of it. See, the world tries to tell us that makes the thought of there being a God that made all of this less likely, when in fact, it makes it more likely. Anybody who is intellectually and scientifically honest will know that that's true, that this wasn't an accident. The more you learn about the DNA, the more we learn about the systems, the ecology of our world, the more we look at it, we see how complex and incredible it is. So everybody oohs and ahs about animals and the animal kingdom and what goes on in the world, in nature. But really, you don't have to look any further than in the mirror. That when you look at yourself, and it's amazing that we see that diminishing today, how we treat babies and children and human beings, that we're nothing more than just upright animals. In fact, some people will treat puppies with greater respect and love and care than they would a child. And that just shows you the attack of the enemy to try to rob us of our identity, of our purpose and our calling. So when we talk about identity, one of the biggest things that we tend to do is that we build our identity on what we do. And when that changes, we tend to panic, and it can make us feel lost. But it really can be an opportunity for God to do something or to really take us to the next stage. Man, have I watched this. As a church leader and as a guy who has been involved in so many different kinds of ministries. I've been involved in music ministry. I've been involved in Bible teaching. I have done children's ministry, youth ministry, worship ministry, administration, every imaginable. I have been a president of various organizations that reached out into the community. I've served in so many ways. I've also been a part-time missionary going to nations all over the world. I've done just about all of it. And I got to tell you, what is interesting is that what I have watched, what I've observed, is that when a person takes that ministry on as their identity, that's very difficult to take that away. In other words, for someone to come in and say, you know what, we need you over there. Or, we've just been watching you. We think you would do a better job over there. Man, we see this in the world every single day, and even more so in the church. Why? Because a lot of this is volunteer, and a lot of us are motivated, and we're drawn to do things and to take on ministries and opportunities because we feel the need. And what does it do? Well, it makes us feel important, it makes us feel needed, and those tap in to very deep needs and emotions in us. Why? Because God created us to be needed. God created us to have purpose. We are made in his image. And what does God do? God is loving. God serves. God is faithful. God cares for what is his. He will war and battle, and he's jealous over what is his. And that all plays out in our personalities. It plays out. However, when we're broken, when we're without Christ, and if we don't handle that well, then as I said, it can make us feel lost, and it can have other emotional things. Do other things inside. It's going to make us angry. It can make us judgmental. It can make us really in an unhealthy way, jealous and bitter, and we can lash out at people. Well, it makes sense, whether it just be somebody, you going from one position to another, or you need it over there, or maybe you start to get older and you can't sing as well. Maybe you can't hold that door open anymore. Maybe it's very difficult to even teach or to serve, or, sometimes can't drive at night and things that are happening at night. These things become limiters. And if we don't see them as an opportunity, then they can really undo us. But what I'm encouraging you to do is that when these changes happen, you see it as an opportunity to learn something new and to embrace a new identity that is really just kind of like a flower, like a rose as it begins to unfold. There's other petals. And so when you're just that initial bud, you are what you are, but there are many layers of you and me. And they're going to be displayed over time. And those outer petals begin to brown and die and even fall away. But inside the core of that rose, there is the deepest, most wonderful smell and the fragrance that begins to come out of that life. And as it is, going to its final stages, it's at its most beautiful. because there's so much that you can see. And that is us. So we're more than just, what we do. We're more than that. We're more than just the image, right? It's more than just what people see. We're called to be fruitful and to multiply and continue to do that until we die. And if we go to that first commandment that God gave Adam and Eve, and it's ours too, that we continue to be fruitful and multiply, then what we're going to find is that God is incredibly ready to show us those different layers. And so, again, the opportunities. And he wants us to do. So what does that look like? What are we called really to do? What is the new opportunity? Well, to make something grow, to bring life to it, not tear it apart, but to bring joy and life, to help others, to make it easier for others in whatever we do, to either pray for them or to help them, to support them. See, really, identity takes years to build. The young person who works hard, most often, they're narrowing, they're experiencing something. And often what we do is we really borrow from others' identity because we haven't got our own yet. So we look at other people. So I want to be like that person, or I want to be like what inspires us, right? I mean, I watch musicians all the time, and it says it had a list of all their inspirations. What were their influences, right? What were the influences? Well, what you're talking about as a young person looking at somebody and saying, I like what they do. I want to be like them. But in time, what we learn is that you can't do that because we are unique, because of the DNA, because of how unique we are. We're always going to have a different expression. Those are just starter kits. Those are just those experiences, those people in our life just introduce us to things. In my own life journey, I learned and I realized that I could not be like anyone, anybody else, especially those who mentored me. But what they were able to do, did they influence me? Sure. Did they affect how I speak and my style and maybe how I look at life? Absolutely. But in time, I began to say, but this is my unique expression of what you are or what you have. Turns out they got it from somebody else too. It's just passed on, from person to person. And again, it becomes something unique and something different, whether it be a creativity or just your take on something. They talk about this being thesis and, antithesis and then synthesis as far as how you see thought develop. But you also see it take place in just how people are developed. So again, as a young person, if you're a young person listening to this, then that's what's taking place. You don't even really know who you are yet. You're figuring it out. Jesus didn't come into the fullness of his ministry until he's about 30 years old. They say that the brain, especially of the male, is not fully developed until the age of 25. Well, then he's only just starting to begin to figure out who he is and being able to use the capacity of his brain to figure that out. So 30, and then 30 to 40, and then 45, 47, man, by the time you hit 50, you know who you are, man. And more importantly, you know who you are not. And identity is as much about discovering who you are as much as it is figuring out, well, I'm not that person. I'll never be that person. And those were some of my revelations. At first, it's quite a disappointment. You mean I'll never be like them? Wow, that's painful because I like them and I like being like them. But when that is taken away and you realize, well, wait a minute now. But there's an expression that I have. I want to give you an example. I'm an artist. I love to watercolor paint, and I do it when I can. And I sell some of my paintings. I've done animals and landscapes and sometimes portraits, not so much those. But I love painting. And when I began to paint, I realized, oh my gosh, I was created to do this. I was born to have a brush in my hand. I love it. However, I can look, and there are painters out there that are much better than me. Much better. If I'd started earlier, I could be where they are. Truth is, and then I began to also find and see, and I chuckle and I'm jest, but I also noticed that they're not as good as me, some of them. And I joked and I think to myself, they're selling that for $100. And that's barely even good. But that's just my take. But what? I didn't judge them. What I did is it turned it on myself. And I said, you know what? Because I didn't think I was good enough. I let other people and their expressions in art discourage me, when in fact, I had my own expression, my own style. They call it finding your own voice as it is expressed through your painting. Well, look, you can see that translate into every aspect of your life, can't you? To find your own voice in your music, find your own voice in your writing, find your own voice in how you raise your kids, how you work, how you build a life, how you raise money, all of it. Everything that we're called to do is going to be unique. And the faster we embrace that, the better off we are. Because if we don't discover this, then we're going to be just like that Anna Delvey, I think it was, that we could just try to fool everybody. We try to con everyone by taking on everybody else's identity and creating this false identity. And you say, well, nobody does it. Yeah, they do. In fact, if you're listening to this and you don't know Christ as your Savior, then I want you to know that you really can't begin this journey of purpose and identity until you know who the purpose giver is, who the person that gave you and created you to be who you are. When you discover that, now you're really on a journey, and He will show you. God will show you, and it will come forth in peace. It'll come forth in discovery and wonderful opportunities. Now, sometimes you're going to, now remember, don't forget this word, that its identity is discovering who you were made to be, but also discovering who you're not made to be. And that, my friend, people talk about self-awareness, and that's really what that is. So I want to finish here because this has been a little bit longer, and there were so many other things I wanted to say. But I will say this, that sometimes even Christians can fall into awkward ways, and we need to shed those. If we're struggling in finding our identity, it's because we're not going to the identifier. We're not going to the person. And so we need to do that, and discover what it is. Now, I wanted to finish with 2 Corinthians chapter 2, 1 through 10. I believe it's chapter 2. And he says this, I must go on boasting. He's talking about who he is. And I'll say this before I read it. Paul is boasting, but he knows he's not supposed to boast. He's really just kind of saying, hey, if I could boast, this is what I would boast about. He says, I must go on boasting, though there is nothing to be gained by it. I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord, things he's experienced. Verse 2, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was caught up into paradise, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. On behalf of this man, I will boast, but on my own behalf, I will not boast, except of my weaknesses. What he's saying is, in his own little way, Paul is telling us that was me, but I don't even want to associate with it. He says, honestly, what I've learned is that I need to really boast in my weaknesses. And he's ready to tell you why. Verse 6, though if I should wish to boast, I would not be a fool, for I would be speaking the truth, but I refrain from it, so that no one may think more of me than he sees in me or hears from me. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness, a thorn was giving me in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. Paul's saying, look, I experienced so much. God was going to help me keep my feet on the ground. Now, we don't know what his thorn was. But he says 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about it, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power, here's his key, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul has discovered something, that when you're on this journey of identity, you're going to discover too. And that is really, in the end, it's not all about us. See, identity is we carrying the mission and the calling and the purpose in this life. But folks, this is just a blip of our eternal existence. And I just want you to get this image. What does God really want? What is God after? He's after bringing us back to our garden experience. Not that we could ever go back to that existence of innocence or the state of innocence. What's done is done. But he does want to bring us back into fellowship and closeness, walking with him in the cool of the day, being able to walk in an existence where everything is provided. And then that our very existence is absolutely surrounded by our Creator, and we enjoy him, we love him, and he loves us. And there's no disruption, there's no sin, there's no struggle, there's no battle, there's no depression, there's no fighting over who we are and who we shouldn't be. Mm-mm. See, that's what God is moving us toward. And so even though we get to enjoy that in this world, there is absolutely a strong sense in the New Testament that this is just a way station for us to finally arrive where our identity is so completely wrapped up in him that Paul says, you know what? When it's less about me, then I experience more of him. When I realize that as I achieve and see these weaknesses, because I'm looking for perfection, never will find it. I will only be made perfect in Christ when I close my eyes for the last time. And so will you. So will you. Where you are weak, there you are strong. Identity is really not the goal here, folks. The real goal is really finding Christ and knowing that everything in my life revolves around him. That if I experience in anything good, if I can paint, sing, build, think, create, work, do anything with my hands, if I'm fast, if I score goals, baskets, hit home runs, have even entered the Hall of Fame on all of the above, it still will be left here. It still means nothing when it comes to eternity. You know, it's funny, I think sometimes that some of those men that are in the Hall of Fame, they walk through, and when we walk through and look at the bus and the stories, it's funny how it diminishes. It doesn't have the same impact. I mean, we're wowed by the numbers. We see it. When I think of Ty Cobb and what he was able to accomplish in the period of time in baseball that he did it, it is pretty amazing. But you know what? There are people that are doing amazing things. Those records, those accomplishments, those things are being bested every single day. And so we diminish. And somebody else comes and takes her place. And it's a sad thing when you think about just this world, but when you think about the next and how that is all going to be gone. And what we'll celebrate is God's achievement of sending his son to the world and dying for our sins. And then us being restored to the Father. Now there is the real identity, found in him forever. And that's what I believe we will find when we find him. I'm praying for you. I hope you find him if you don't know him. And I pray that if you're struggling with all of these things I'm sharing with you today, that you will find peace in Christ today. God bless you, and you have an absolutely great week. We'll see you next time.